Spider-Man Homecoming is the latest installment in the ever-expanding Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's actually the first time that Marvel Studios and Sony have collaborated on a superhero movie, and this marks the first time that Spider-Man is making an appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Obviously, before this we've seen Spider-Man in the Raimi trilogy, we've seen Spider-Man in the Mark Webb films, but obviously after they made Spider-Man 2 really kind of performed under expectations and everyone really didn't like that film, Sony decided to make a deal with Marvel so that Marvel could have full creative control on a Spider-Man film while Sony still had the rights to kind of actually distribute the film and get the money from the box office. And going into this film, even though I'm a big fan of Spider-Man and obviously I'm a big fan of comic book movies and I love superheroes, I wasn't tremendously excited to go into this. I love Tom Holland in his small role that he had in last year's Captain America Civil War. I think he was really great in that role and I really loved every minute he was on screen in that film. But I was like, does he really need his own movie? Do we really need another feature-length Spider-Man film? It's not been that long since we've had the last one. It's like this is like the third iteration of the character within the past 10 years. Do we really need another Spider-Man film? So I went in not that excited, but I have to say, coming out, I was actually really happy with Spider-Man Homecoming. I actually had a real great time with this movie, and it was not only a really great, fun, awesome time at the movies, but it was just so refreshing to see a Spider-Man film that finally seemed to actually understand the character of Spider-Man. And a lot of people seem to say that, they finally got it right, but they actually did with Homecoming, because I like the original two Raimi films. I think Spider-Man 2 is a fantastic film. I would regard that as one of the best superhero movies of all time. But even with a film like Spider-Man 2, we still have Tobey Maguire in the role, who I liked, but he was like a 30-year-old guy. He wasn't really like a kid, and Spider-Man is supposed to be a kid at school. And even though I think Spider-Man 2 nailed the duality of the character, where he's trying to balance his two lives, one as Peter Parker and one as Spider-Man, that high school aspect of the character that is so important, so pivotal, and really is at the core of the character of Spider-Man, was missing, because in the Raimi trilogy, he's out of school within the first 10 minutes of the original film. So, we've never really seen the high school aspect of the character really nailed before until now, because what Marvel did with Homecoming, which was a strike of genius, was that they set it in high school. And this really is not just a film that's primarily set in high school, but it's a high school movie. And that's what was so refreshing about it. It was essentially a high school teen comedy that just happened to be a superhero movie about Spider-Man, and that was just perfect. I'm so glad they decided to go that route. They were like, right, we're going to take it back to high school, we're going to make Spider-Man a 15-year-old kid, because that's who he's supposed to be. When Spider-Man starts off in the comics, he's 15, so I love the fact that they got Tom Holland in there, a younger actor, playing a younger Peter Parker in high school, and just that alone makes this film one of the best Spider-Man movies we've ever had. And I don't know if this is like hands down the best Spider-Man film we've ever had. I'd still probably put Spider-Man 2 above this. I think Spider-Man 2 is still the superior film, but I would definitely say that Spider-Man Homecoming is the most comic accurate Spider-Man film we've ever had. And one of the things that made this so refreshing, in my opinion, was the casting of Tom Holland. As I said, I loved him in the small role he had in Civil War, but it was hard to judge how good of a Spider-Man and Peter Parker he was going to be based on that film, because he had one small scene as Peter Parker and then one appearance as Spider-Man. So it was hard to tell what he was going to be like in his own movie. Was he going to be able to carry his own film? But after Homecoming, I was like, he absolutely smashed it. And not only did I love him in Civil War, but he just really has proved to everyone, any naysayers that were like, is he the right actor for this part? You watch Homecoming, you're like, it was just perfect casting. I'm so glad they went with Tom Holland, because he's a younger actor. You buy into the fact that he is this 15-year-old kid, and he's a really great actor as well. He really sells the character of Peter Parker and Spider-Man to us. Even though I really liked Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, I really liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. What Tom Holland did was that he nailed both aspects of the character. He was great as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. It wasn't like he was just good at one part of it, and that seems to be the case of a lot of superhero movies, where actors are kind of great at portraying one side of the character, like the Secret Identity, but not so great at the other side, or vice versa. But with Tom Holland, he's does a great job as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And one of the best things about this film is that they cast young actors to play kids. And it sounds so obvious, you know, if you've got a film about kids in high school, you would cast young actors, but what's always bugged me about the past Spider-Man films, even the ones that I like the original 2 Raimi films, is that it was never believable that these guys were kids at school, because you could just tell they were in their late 20s, early 30s, and it always seemed off. There was always something off about those early Spider-Man films, and even the Andrew Garfield films as well, is that you could just tell they weren't kids, and it didn't ruin the film for me, but it does kind of suck you out of it, where you're like, that's not a kid, that's some guy in his late 20s, early 30s pretending to be a kid in high school. But with this film, all the actors in the young cast of kind of high schoolers are young actors. So you buy into the fact that they're 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids because they look 15 years old. So that's what made this film so good for me. And it seems like a small thing, but as I said, it's always something that's bugged me in the past. It's always seemed that there was something off about those other films because of the fact that the actors were so much older, pretending to be so much younger than they were. Whereas in this film, you just buy into the fact that these are young kids in school because they look like young kids, because they are young kids. So that's what was so great about the casting of this film. I loved all the actors in that young cast. Jacob Batalon was really good as Ned, Peter Parker's friend. He was really great. He was actually one of the highlights of the film and one of the best supporting characters as kind of Peter's kind of nerdy friend who's kind of desperately trying to keep the fact that he knows Spider-Man is secret, but he's like a really excitable kid and he can't contain himself. He was really great. As I already mentioned, Tom Holland smashes it in the role. I absolutely loved him in that role as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And of course, I've got to talk about Michael Keaton as the Vulture. When they first announced Michael Keaton was going to be the villain in this film, I was so excited because Michael Keaton is such a great actor, and obviously he was Batman back in the day and he was Birdman a couple of years ago, and now we're seeing him as a super villain in a Marvel movie, and so I was so excited to see him. But I was also a little worried and a little trepidatious going in because a lot of the time the villains in these Marvel movies aren't that great. They're not that memorable. They just get killed off and then, you know, you don't really ever care about seeing them again. But the Vulture was actually surprisingly one of the best villains we've ever had in a Marvel movie, especially in this Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he's not one of the best villains we've ever seen in a comic book movie ever, but as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe is concerned, I would definitely say he's one of the best villains we've seen this side of Loki. I mean, he's definitely right up there. He was a really great villain, and why he was such a good bad guy is not just because Michael Keaton delivered a great performance and he was both kind of charismatic and charming, but also very just evil and scary at the same time. But you could understand where he was coming from, and for me, the best villains are the ones that are just undeniably deadly and evil, but at the same time, you can understand why they're doing what they're doing and why they're thinking in that way. And with Michael Keaton's Vulture, from the get-go, you're given kind of understandable reasons as to why he's doing what he's doing, as to why he would become a criminal, why he would become a villain, and so you get it. And without spoiling anything, there's actually kind of very emotional, dramatic reasons as to why his character's doing what he's doing. And I actually really like that, because a lot of the time in these Marvel movies, the villains, they're not necessarily terrible villains, but they're just bad guys who are just evil just for the sake of it, and they're not kind of just fully fleshed out characters in their own right. But with Michael Keaton's Vulture, he was a fleshed out character who had understandable reasons as to why he was doing what he was doing. He wasn't just evil for the sake of it, and so I really like that. And for me, that's what made him one of the best villains we've seen in the MCU thus far, because we understood where he was coming from. He wasn't just some generic evil bad guy. And contrary to most Marvel movie villains, I actually hope we get to see more of him in future films because he was that good. He's not just some throwaway token villain who we don't ever want to see again. I actually want to see him come back, so hopefully he will get to come back in future films, because I think Michael Keaton did a really great job, and the Vulture was actually made for a really great bad guy. And also, as far as the supporting characters are concerned, I loved all the actors in the cast, but as far as the main ones, obviously we got Robert Downey Jr. in this as Tony Stark and Iron Man, which connects it to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. And one of my worries going in, I didn't think this was going to become Iron Man 4. Even though there was a lot of Iron Man in the trailers, I knew they were doing that just to get butts and seats, just so people were like, oh look, this is Iron Man, this is in the Marvel Universe, I'm going to go and see this. I knew he wasn't going to take over, I knew it wasn't going to become the Iron Man show, but I was still a little worried that Iron Man might have kind of overshadowed Spider-Man a bit, he might have taken the spotlight away from him, he might have kind of outshined Spider-Man in his own movie, but thankfully that did not happen at all. Not only is this a Spider-Man film through and through, but Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark and Iron Man, he's really not in the film a whole lot. He's in like 2 or 3 scenes, he's in a handful of scenes scattered throughout the film, so he's barely in the movie, and I absolutely love that because I really like Robert Downey Jr. in that role. Obviously he's so great as Tony Stark. Whenever he pops up, you know, you just got a smile on your face because he's like, he's pretty much just being himself, but Robert Downey Jr. is just so perfectly cast in that role. And as I mentioned, he's only in just a handful of scenes scattered throughout, so he doesn't take the spotlight away from Spider-Man at all. He really is supporting Spider-Man. And the great thing about Iron Man's role in this is that he's, you know, not taken away from Spider-Man's story, he's serving Spider-Man's story. And I really love the part that Robert Downey Jr. played in this movie, where he's like a mentor figure, he's almost a father figure to Spider-Man in a way. The role that Tony Stark plays in this is kind of building off of everything we've seen from him in these past movies, and I think it was really well handled because he could have taken over, he could have taken the spotlight away from Spider-Man, but it was just perfectly handled. He had the perfect amount of screen time, and I absolutely love the part that he played. But my favourite supporting character in this film might have been Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan. I did not think he was going to have as big a role as he had, and he didn't have a massive role or anything, but he actually did have a bigger role in this than Iron Man, and I think that was the perfect decision to make. The fact that, you know, Happy Hogan actually has more screen time than Iron Man, because if Iron Man had the screen time that Happy Hogan had, people might have complained and be like, oh, Iron Man's in too much of this, why does he keep popping up? But because it was Happy Hogan, it never felt like it was kind of like an Iron Man film, because yes, he's a supporting character from Iron Man, but he's popped up in some of these other movies, and he's not, you know, he isn't like Tony Stark or anything. And I think it was a great idea bringing Jon Favreau back as Happy Hogan in this film, because I was thinking, what role is he going to play? Has he really got any place in the Spider-Man movie? But I absolutely love the role that he played in this, and this might be my favourite performance from Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan that we've seen in any of these Marvel movies. And it's probably the biggest role he's had as Happy Hogan in these Marvel movies as well. He was actually really great in this. I absolutely love the part that he played, and Jon Favreau is just so great in that role. I'm glad that he got a whole lot to do in this film. And also, something I have to mention is the comedy. And I think some people have been saying that, oh, the comedy takes over, it's too much like a Marvel movie humour in this, it sucks you out of it. But for me, I would think the exact opposite. I could see that argument being made for something like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And even though I love Guardians Volume 2, you know, it did feel like they were trying to cram so much humour into that film, which I liked. I think the majority of it hit, but it did feel like they were trying a bit too much and going a bit too overboard with the humour in that film. But with this, I didn't feel that at all. And the reason why, I think, even though there was a lot of comedy, it didn't feel like it was shoehorned in there. It didn't feel like there was too much, because humour and comedy is just an inherent part of the character of Spider-Man. So it didn't feel out of place at all. I would equate it to kind of the comedy in Deadpool. With Deadpool, it didn't feel like there was an overload of humour, because that's just an integral part of who that character is. And it's the same thing with Spider-Man. You know, Deadpool was very much inspired by Spider-Man. And so that kind of witty, quippy, kind of snarky attitude that Spider-Man has, you're going to get comedy from that. And even though there was a lot of humour in this film, the humour was so well done, it's like it wasn't really noticeable for me. I had to actually think about it and go, oh yeah, there actually was a lot of comedy. It actually was very funny, because, like I said, it felt so natural, it felt so seamless. Nothing really took me out of the film, so I absolutely loved all the comedy in this film. I think the humour really worked. And also, I can't do a review of a comic movie and not talk about the action. Of course, the action sequences are all really great in this film. If I had any criticism, I'd say the action sequences aren't the best parts of the film, but that's not really a negative, because that just speaks to how great everything else was. You know, the characters were really well defined, really well realised, the acting was great, the comedy was awesome. Like, I loved everything about the movie, and I still enjoyed the action sequences. It's just that the action sequences weren't, for me, the best parts of the film, but I don't think that's really a criticism. It's more speaks to just how great everything else was. But the one really good thing about the action sequences was that the fact that it made it more small scale, it made it more personal. It wasn't about the world ending, it wasn't about, you know, someone trying to blow up the city. And I think that was really great. I think it's actually refreshing to see a Spider-Man film that is smaller scale. That is about him stopping just criminals doing bad things, because that's what really Spider-Man is. He's a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Yes, he plays with some of the big guys in the Avengers, but he's also more of a street level hero. He's not like, stopping some kind of world invasion. He's there just trying to fight crime in his neighborhood, and I like the fact that they made it smaller scale. They made it more personal to the character Spider-Man. It set it apart from the other movies in that respect. And yes, the action sequences weren't anything mind-blowing. They weren't anything spectacular. I didn't think the action sequences were the best parts of the film, but I do love the fact that they made it smaller scale and that they made it more personal to the character of Spider-Man. It was more about him trying to face the struggles of kind of becoming the hero he needs to become. It was more of a kind of coming of age story almost for the character of Spider-Man. It was less an origin story for how he becomes Spider-Man, because he's already Spider-Man, but it was more of a coming of age story of how he needs to kind of grow and become the hero he needs to be. Even though he's already got the powers and he's already technically Spider-Man, it was about him kind of growing and going on this journey to actually becoming Spider-Man. And because a lot of the movie he's kind of facing problems, and a lot of the things that go wrong and a lot of the things that happen in the action sequences go bad and go south because of him. So the whole film really is about him learning and him growing to becoming the Spider-Man that he needs to become. So I actually really like that about the film, actually. And lastly, one final thing I have to mention is that there was actually a lot of kind of big surprises and reveals throughout this film that I really wasn't expecting. And you could say, okay, the story overall was pretty predictable and pretty formulaic. There was nothing that really happened that really shocked you and was like, whoa, my god, I didn't expect the stories to go in that direction. But there were some individual moments and some individual kind of reveals and surprises scattered throughout the film that really took me by surprise and I really didn't see coming. Yeah, you could say it was pretty formulaic as a storyline overall, but the fact that they had these big surprises and big reveals scattered throughout, it kept you engaged and it kept you interested and it kept you like, whoa, like it took you by surprise many times throughout this film. Well, it did for me anyway. I was like, wow, I did not expect that. I did not see that coming at all. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm referring to, but I really loved all those little kind of surprises and the big reveals that they had throughout the film that really kind of caught me off guard and really kind of made the movie even better almost. Like when we got the really big one, like halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, it almost kind of made you think about the film in a different way, and it added a whole lot more to that character, and it added even more layers than you didn't even realise was there originally. So I absolutely loved the surprises and the reveals that were throughout the entire movie. That really kind of saved the movie from just being another predictable, formulaic superhero movie. As far as negatives I have for the film, there's not really any kind of major criticism I can give this film as far as, that was something I really didn't like, that was something that was a real problem for me. There are a couple of things, like I felt like the action scenes could have had a little bit more intensity and they could have been a little bit more thrilling and exciting. But it's kind of both a positive and a negative, because even though I could call that a negative, it's kind of not what they were really going for. They were going for a more fun, light-hearted, teen comedy take on the character. So they weren't trying to go for some kind of dramatic thriller. They weren't trying to go for like intensity and thrills. So, for me to say I wanted it to be more intense and dramatic and more thrilling isn't really a valid criticism, because they weren't really going for that. So it's not really fair for me to criticise the movie for not doing something that it wasn't trying to do. So overall, as you can tell, I really enjoyed Spider-Man Homecoming. I don't think this is the best Spider-Man movie we've ever had. I still think Spider-Man 2 is the better film, but this is definitely, without any doubt, the most comic accurate representation of the character I think we've ever seen on screen. And for me, Tom Holland is definitely the most kind of accurate representation of the character Peter Parker and Spider-Man we've ever seen on the big screen. Also, it was a Spider-Man movie that understood the character of Spider-Man right down to the core. It is a film that actually got what the character is all about, that Spider-Man is a kid in high school who's trying to balance this crazy life of being Spider-Man, being a superhero, with also being a kid in school, because that is really what Spider-Man is all about. That's at the core of the character, the fact that he's a kid in school but he's also a superhero at the same time. That's what sets him apart from the other Avengers, from the other Marvel heroes, that he's not an adult that's been doing this for years and years. He's not a professional, he's not a celebrity. He's just a regular kid in school who also happens to be a superhero. And this film absolutely nailed that. I really enjoyed myself watching this movie. I thought it was a really great time. Okay, I have some tiny little nitpicky issues with it, but nothing that really affected my enjoyment of the film. Nothing that was of a detriment to the film, I thought. So, screw it. I'm going to give Spider-Man Homecoming 5 stars. And there we have it, that wraps up my review of Spider-Man Homecoming. Have you seen the film yet? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you like this, make sure to click subscribe to see more. If you missed my last film review, be sure to go ahead and click over here to catch up on my last film review, or perhaps down here to catch up on another one of my recent videos. But with that being said, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.